And a very warm welcome. You're joining us here at Hyde Park on other Derana 24. And tonight we're talking about Sri Lanka's economic development, revival and expectations from the international community, development agencies, as well as how Sri Lanka's short to mid-term challenges will shape economic growth going forward. To discuss all this, we've invited to our studios the country director for Sri Lanka of the Asian Development Bank, a key development partner in Sri Lanka's economic way forward. A very warm welcome to you, and Ayubowan.
Ayubowan. Thank you for having me.
We're certainly honored to have you here. We have with us Mr. Takafumi Kadono. Of course, we know you as Taka.
Yes.
I'd like to start off talking about, we saw just in April also ADB had the outlook for Sri Lanka's economy released, and you had certain recommendations as well as your own perspective through research of where Sri Lanka is heading. But right now, what is the outlook for Sri Lanka's economy this year and going forward?
Okay, thank you. That's a good place to start. So, as you know, we just announced our Asian Development Outlook, in which for Sri Lanka, we forecasted a GDP growth of 3.9% this year and 3.4% the following year in 2026. And this is on the back of a very robust growth in 2024, last year, of 5%. And it has been remarkable because there had been a contraction of 7.3% in 2022 and 2.3% contraction in 2023. So due to that very strong growth in 2024, there's going to be a little bit of a moderation in the growth prospect. So that is the growth projection that we have. But one caveat is that these projections were made prior to the announcement of the so-called reciprocal tariffs. And therefore, as with the usual practice, we will be updating this every quarter. So hopefully we will be able to give you new forecasts in the coming weeks or months.
What can you share with us at this stage? Especially, you mentioned the report was prepared and released or published before the US tariffs, reciprocal tariffs were imposed. We do have a 90-day pause period, but with all that, it's inevitable. We cannot avoid these tariffs regardless of how much it is going to be. The percentage is undecided. So what kind of understanding do you and your team have about how it's going to impact Sri Lanka?
So that's a difficult question to answer, because I think one thing that is certain is that there is immense uncertainties, right? So you have recently seen the de-escalation between the US-China tariffs. And in an environment where tariff is hiked up to 145% and then reduced down to 30%, it's very difficult to see how that impacts other countries as well. And of course, I understand the government, since being slapped with 44% tariffs to the US, have been negotiating with the US authorities. I do not have any details on the contents of that discussion or where that would land. However, we believe that, I think it was only China who has the muscles to have this retaliatory tariff. Other countries have all selected the route to negotiate, and this is what Sri Lanka is doing. So I think it was the only path for the government to take. Now, whether that 44% will remain at that level or will come down, it's hard to tell. But the competitiveness of Sri Lanka, we need to look at how the other countries do in their negotiations as well, especially those countries in similar product spaces, like Cambodia and Vietnam, who were slapped with higher tariffs than Sri Lanka. And then you have Bangladesh, I think 37%, India 26% or whatever. So those countries that are in similar product spaces and exporting similar products to the US, we need to see how they would manage their discussions and where their tariffs land. And while it is not that formula to derive at that 44% and other tariff figures is not really related to how much tariffs the Sri Lanka government imposes on imports from the US, and that applies to all the countries, right? That formula is purely on trade imbalances.
Right.
But at the same time, it is a good opportunity for the government to revisit, the Sri Lankan government, to revisit its own tariff and non-tariff barriers or policies. I think this is an opportunity because the country needs to grow somehow, and it is important to attract investments as well, create that investor-friendly environment, and more a transparent, simple, predictable tariff is also necessary. But another point is that of the total exports of Sri Lanka, I understand about a quarter is directed at the United States, of which around 50–60% are apparel.
Right.
So there is a concentration both in the trade partner as well as the product, the export basket. And again, this is a wake-up call that there is a need to diversify. And I know the country has been talking about diversification for a long time, but it should take this situation seriously to take concrete actions in that direction. In terms of the impact, regardless of whether it is 44% or not, the garment sector may be hit. And I understand there's around 300,000 people employed in the industry, and if you look at the household level, that's more than 1 million people that may be impacted. So that may put pressure on social protection expenditures of the government, and that may also change the GDP growth outlook as well. But we are, of course, hoping that the tariffs will come down to a reasonable level, and for Sri Lanka to take the opportunity to make a change.
Even if tariffs come down to a reasonable level, it's going to be higher than what it is now, assuming it is going to be. And that is going to be a blow on Sri Lanka's apparel industry now, with Sri Lanka not having many industries to cushion the kind of blow it's going to have on the apparel sector. What in your understanding, I know we've spoken about diversification, I'd like to go there in a little while, but many experts say Sri Lanka will have to have some leverage here. What is our leverage? What do we give back? But that's not the question. How do you think Sri Lanka prepare for this? And how do you have any industries that you've earmarked or identified as a potential that Sri Lanka can develop to face challenges that our major industries, traditionally foreign exchange earning industries, once they face challenges, will have sort of like a buffer?
Yeah, well, it's not a buffer, but of course we all recognize that the tourism industry is an engine of growth where it can be further expanded. There's a lot of discussion about the footfall, increasing the footfall to beyond 2 million tourists, etc. But it's more about the revenue, the profitability of that industry. So, and also we need to think about the sustainability at the same time. You already see over-tourism in some areas like Yala or Sigiriya, while the country has so many diverse offerings. So what we are doing at the Asian Development Bank is we're also supporting the tourism industry to, again, diversify its offerings and to adopt more sustainable practices as well, and to bring in higher value, even if it's low volume. higher value tourists to come and to spend more and to really enjoy an exclusive, genuine experience in Sri Lanka. Apart from that, we do also subscribe to the idea of the digital economy as well. I understand the government wants to expand the digital economy to 12% of the GDP. And we are very excited to join that journey. And the other day, together with the Ministry of Digital Economy and the UNDP, we co-organized this Digital Public Infrastructure Summit as a symbol to kickstart this effort. And I think there was a lot of traction, a lot of interest from the private sector as well. We brought in line ministries as well, because there are many digital technologies and solutions that could be used to improve how the government operates and delivers public services. And there's ample opportunity for the private sector to play a role in this space. And we are also in discussion with the government on an upcoming loan to support that initiative, to take the initial steps. For example, in enhancing the broadband coverage, building or supporting some of the building blocks of the digital public infrastructure, the DPI, such as data exchange, for example, and also to have key regulations, laws and regulations in place, for example, on cybersecurity or data privacy, etc. So we are in conversation with that, and we hope that
and how
this
much
will
is
grow.
the loan amounting to?
We have not decided yet. We're still thinking about what is the scope. I mean, we need to have a sequential approach, and of course, it's not just the ADB who is willing to support this effort. And we also need to see the implementation capacity, because the Ministry of Digital Economy is new, and then there will be other maybe agency that would be involved in the actual implementation. So we are in quite intense discussions with them to really accelerate the preparation and to define the scope, like you said, and determine the amount of the loan and the implementation arrangement. So hopefully by next year, we can start the project.
You mentioned about the discussions and talks, especially on digital infrastructure. How do you analyze Sri Lanka's readiness, preparedness, and ability to implement and move forward? Also, how adopting a digital economy is going to transform Sri Lanka's situation?
So, in our country partnership strategy, which is a document that guides how we partner with the Sri Lankan government to support its growth, we highlight the importance of digitalization, digital transformation. One area is, of course, on the delivery of public services, and the other is to strengthen governance. We think digital technologies is a powerful tool to enhance transparency, efficiency, and to curb corruption as well. With respect to the level of readiness, we do see some of these building blocks already starting to be implemented, like the digital identification, as well as GovPay, and the broadband coverage is quite good. So there is that foundation. But according to Dr. Han's presentation, which I admire, across all the metrics that indicate the maturity of the digital economy, Sri Lanka is in the third or the fourth quartile on every type of indices. So the idea is to accelerate this formation of digital economy to bring itself up to maybe the second quartile, in a few years, and also to build digital skills so that there'll be more, especially young people, equipped with digital skills who can compete globally as well.
And there's potential.
I think there is. When I go visit some of the startup ecosystems, I see very vibrant young people with creative ideas already selling their services, their solutions globally out of Sri Lanka. So I think there is great potential.
When we talk about the ecosystem for support, especially to startups, there has been discussion about why there is not much enthusiasm or support or encouragement, whether it's financing or creating that ecosystem that you spoke about. What more needs to be done when we talk about creating that ecosystem and also support in terms of financing for these startups, especially when we look at Sri Lankan youth going and reaching out to the rest of the world?
I think, of course, there needs to be, so for one example, there's a project that is called Science and Technology Human Resources Development Project, which is closing soon successfully.
This is of the ADB?
This is ADB funded, yes. And we are supporting 4 universities to strengthen their science and technology faculties. So the project involves building, their faculty, the structures, but more than that, we are helping with coming up with new curriculums, twinning programs with other universities abroad, providing research grants, and also creating that linkage between the academia and the industry. Because there are interesting research going on, but that to make that commercialized is a new step that needs to be taken. And usually these researchers or those with these creative ideas sometimes lack. And that's why in the startup ecosystem there is mentoring and coaching as well, and then connecting them to investors. And that brings us to the topic of financing, right? And I think here there is a reliance on debt financing generally, right? So it's very difficult to have investors put in equity for your businesses. So whether it's a private equity or a venture capital, so those are areas that we need to strengthen. And in our upcoming programs, we want to look into that space. For example, creating a fund of funds, for example, or having the legal regulatory environment where investors can invest in such funds. So these are areas that we will be looking at.
Just to clarify, you mentioned 4 universities. These are local universities where you'll be setting up new faculties.
Yes.
Right.
Like the Kelaniya University, Rajarata University, etc.
How soon are we expecting the faculties to contribute to our education?
I think they are already. The facilities are ready, and then the curriculums are being rolled out, and we had some of the opening ceremony as well. But of course it would take time, right? Because like even research, you build your research on top of an existing research, and you keep on expanding as well.
This is more on a research and development focus, is it?
Yes, science and technology, yes. But also we're looking at that commercialization angle as well.
Interesting.
And to obtain patents, for example.
So ADB will support new inventions or innovators to obtain patents, is it?
Well, so the project, so far we have been supporting, but we are completing our project now, so it's up to the government or the universities themselves to take it forward. But if there's a need for us to step in through technical assistances or, study tours or further twinning programs, example, we would be happy to consider such requests.
I believe that also brings us to the question about ADB's involvement here in Sri Lanka. Your mandate, how you are a partner of Sri Lanka's development. I'd like to ask you, especially after the crisis, we saw the ADB extending budget support, and in 2024 too, we saw ADB a loan scheme of, if I'm not mistaken, up to 900 million. How does this impact or support economic revival? And what is really the ADB's involvement as a development partner? Do you support development, or is it budget support? How does this happen?
Okay, good question. So stepping back, we were established in 1966 and Sri Lanka is a founding member. So we have a very long history and we have gone through ups and downs together. And we're quite happy that we were useful during the depth of the economic crisis and during the stabilization and the initial recovery efforts in the recent years as well. In the past we had because we are here for the long run, so the primary objective, of course, is economic development, right? And in order to do that, in the past we focused more on investment type of loans. And by investment, I don't mean just infrastructure, but also building human capital, like in health, education, skills development as well. After this IMF program, there is an expectation that alongside the IMF, we provide the budget support, like you mentioned. This is in the tune of around $2 billion. So how we provide that budget support, well, the reason the budget support is needed is because the government has a financing gap that it needs to bridge in order to pay for the recurrent costs. So this $2 billion is delivered in the form of what we call policy-based loans. So it works similarly to the IMF programs, where the ADB and the government agree on a set of policy actions to strengthen its economy and enhance inclusivity. And then once those policy actions are met, the predetermined amount tranche is released. So last year you mentioned 900, but I think the total volume of fresh loans to Sri Lanka from ADB was $808 million, of which $400 million were budget support.
Is this part of the 2023 budget support, budgetary support that was extended by the ADB?
So in 2023, we had provided budget support of $550 million. Yes, and these are the volumes are determined based on the financing gap and what we call the burden sharing amongst the multilateral institutions who are in this together. So in this case, it's the IMF, ADB, World Bank. Yes. So last year, 400 was budget support, but the other 408 were in projects. So we do continue to finance priority projects, of course keeping in mind the debt sustainability as well. But without investment, there will be no economic growth. There will be no job creation. So we are taking this two-pronged approach. Whether one is higher or lower depends on the situation.
We're talking about debt here and emphasis for Sri Lanka to come out of reliance on debt, especially because we're looking at 2028 and beyond 2028 when we start repaying our loans. What are the challenges as we look at Sri Lanka's financing, the macroeconomic situation now, and factors affecting Sri Lanka's readiness to start repaying loans by 2028, especially as we keep taking more and more loans right now?
So yes, you're right. So, well, first of all, I think we need to commend the government or the governments for reaching near conclusion of the external debt restructuring. And we very much appreciate the new administration, well, the current administration, for following through on that. But like you said, Sri Lanka will need to start repayment for the restructured international sovereign bonds in 2028. So during the period 2028 to around 2038, there's going to be a heavy debt servicing burden. So, as you were alluding to, the country needs to be ready to service those debts by 2028. And for that, the only way is for the economy to grow. So that is why these reforms that are ongoing, these growth enhancing reforms, are extremely important. And then, of course, there needs to be sound macroeconomic situation that lasts, and the political stability as well. And then it kind of goes back to your earlier question on exports and attracting investments, etc. Because what the country needs is non-debt creating financial inflows, not taking on more debt. So this is what the government needs to aim for, and this is what we are trying to support across the various sectors.
We were talking about conditions by whether it's the ADB, World Bank or IMF, the Extended Fund Facility, certain parameters that Sri Lanka should live up to, if I may say. And the continuation of programs that, regardless of whether it's new administration or the previous, the continuation of these programs, how important is it for Sri Lanka to stick to these programs and fulfill and uphold the parameters set by agencies as yours, when we talk about it from attracting investments or sustainability in achieving growth?
Okay, so first of all, so we provide budget support on the back of successful reforms implemented, and we release that tranche. So it is not, we will not be in a favorable position if those reforms are reversed. We will not be able to continue with our budget support the following year. So it is extremely important that the reforms implemented are not reversed and they stay on course. And then, you know, the level of reform will become more ambitious as well. And as I said, we agree on these policy reforms with the government, and we select the ones that are critical for the economy to extricate itself out of the crisis and to put itself on a growth trajectory. So we do believe that these reforms are very important for the economy, and it also sends a positive message to the investors as well, that Sri Lanka is transforming itself. It's, for example, if it's opening up or they have more clearer, predictable legal and regulatory framework in place for investments, and there is enhanced or better governance. So I think by ADB, the World Bank, IMF being involved in selecting the right reforms, and with the government, of course, because ultimately these are the reforms of the government and not ours. We are merely helping to achieve those. So that sends a positive signal to the international community and the investors as well.
Right, I think on that note, we'll take a short break here at Hyde Park. We're in conversation with the Asian Development Bank Country Director for Sri Lanka, Mr. Takafumi Kadono. We'll see you again on the other side of this break. Do stay with us. Welcome back. We're in conversation with ADB Country Director Takafumi Kadono on Sri Lanka's economic revival and support extended by development agencies as Sri Lanka moves forward. Mr. Kadono, we were talking about Sri Lanka's debt, commitments, conditions and reforms agenda. I just want to go back to our conversation just before we went in for a break. To understand if the reforms agenda, Sri Lanka's commitment made to the IMF, the international community, agencies as the ADB, the World Bank, if Sri Lanka has continued with the reform agenda, or there has been, or whether Sri Lanka has veered away from this agenda, but still worked with it? Because I remember you mentioning your support depends on how Sri Lanka fulfills our commitments.
Yes, so generally, I think I should first explain again which sectors that we are involved in supporting these reforms. And one of them is, for example, the power sector reform.
Right.
So it has three reform areas. One is on the structure of the industry, the second is on the tariff, and the third is on attracting private investment into renewable energy. So when the new administration came in, they did commit that they will be following through with the unbundling of the Ceylon Electricity Board. However, they wanted to revisit certain parameters of that. So, and they were very open with us, and not just with ADB, but in this power sector space, we are coordinating very closely with the World Bank and JICA as well. And we have been in numerous discussions on how we can introduce certain changes while still moving towards that end objective of creating a more efficient, transparent industry with affordable, that can deliver affordable electricity and attract private sector investment, particularly in renewable energy. So, of course, this is not new, right? I mean, when a new government comes in, they have some different priorities. But overall, they are still on track. Other areas such as, for example, the SOE reforms, which is a very important topic, I think the government needed some time to think how they would want to go ahead with this SOE reform. But as already indicated in their manifesto or even in the 2025 budget speech, there is a willingness to move forward with SOE reforms. So we are very content with that. However, at this time, we do not know the details yet.
How important is it for Sri Lanka to move ahead with the reforms of state-owned enterprises, a burden to the national economy and early identified by even when a key indicator of the IMF was also a commitment by Sri Lanka to reform SOEs. I understand you don't have much information about the timeline, but if you talk about the importance of SOE reforms at this juncture, when we look at 2028 and when other countries are also talking about 2040 and 50, where they're going to be by that period, and Sri Lanka's aspirations going forward.
Yes, so in Sri Lanka, I understand there are more than 400 SOEs, some say 500. I don't know the exact figures, but there are many. And many are not profitable, so they're relying on the state coffers. So while they may create employment, ultimately it's the taxpayers' money that is keeping these non-profitable, unprofitable SOEs afloat. So definitely there is a need to restructure the SOEs and the situation generally. Previously, we had been supporting the operationalization of the SOE restructuring unit. I think there's a pause on that. But we take comfort in the fact that, again, the budget 2025 mentions the government's willingness to formulate the State Business Enterprises Management Act, which we believe is their policy to restructure or reform the SOE space. So, and I think in the manifesto as well, they indicated that they will be taking a case-by-case approach. And we believe, broadly speaking, that is reasonable, because there are different types of SOEs. There's big ones, there are small ones, there are ones delivering public services versus those are in purely commercial businesses. There are those also delivering public or government policies. And there are those who may also be playing the regulator role in the industry they are competing in with other private sector businesses. So depending on the nature and their situation, we need to take a differentiated approach. So, you know, there's a whole spectrum of different solutions, full divestment, partial divestments, you know, restructuring and commercializing, scaling up, changing their mandate, or even shutting them down in some cases, or even merging them. So there are different options available, and we need to look at what is the most suited for each of the SOEs. And but as been discussed earlier as well, there is this idea of creating a holding company to manage the about 50 main or key SOEs. And this so-called Tamasek model, we think is a good approach, which we hope the government will adopt in order to more professionally manage these SOEs and to instill stronger corporate governance.
But what are the risks really if we don't move ahead as soon as possible, as we say, especially with the external risks we're talking about today and the challenges the economy has faced in the past to overcome the remnants, at least, of the challenges?
Like you said, there are a drain on the treasury, but at the same time, in many cases, it inhibits the industry from becoming active and for private sector players to enter that industry or the market. So that's why it's necessary to have that level playing field or the competition neutrality, so that the private sector can come in and then compete and then deliver higher quality goods or services. And this is how the economy becomes more vitalized, right? So we should really think about if SOEs are inhibiting that, then we need to take a serious look at removing that obstacle, but again, in different ways.
Energy sector transformation, you mentioned earlier, ADB has been a key development partner, financing, extending technical support to Sri Lanka, especially after the crisis, but you're also a specialist. You've been a senior energy specialist, researching and expertise in energy. If you look at the region itself, the South Asian region, what is the potential here for Sri Lanka to not just benefit, but act as a hub?
So for electricity, there is a study done by the World Bank that shows that there is quite a huge amount of wind power potential that can be developed in Sri Lanka. However, of course, the domestic demand is still small compared to that wind potential, technically exploitable potential. So we are interested to see how this conversation on the power interconnection between Sri Lanka and India will pan out, because that would open up an export market. Of course, maybe the electrons will flow bidirectionally. Maybe there's seasonality, or depending on the time of day, one country might be importing at one time and then the other time it might be exporting. But I think in terms of energy security as well, rather than relying on imported fuel, it would make sense to develop its indigenous renewable energy resources. Of course, these renewable energy resources are variable in nature. There are times when the wind doesn't blow or the cloud covers the sun, and therefore the grid needs to be strengthened. So how we are approaching this at ADB is that we help the government introduce a policy framework whereby it makes it easier for the private sector to invest in the renewable energy, the generation subsector, while we provide our loans to the power utility to strengthen the transmission and the distribution system so they can absorb more variable renewable energy. So strengthen not just physically but through digitalization and modernization as well. And in our recently approved project, there will be a battery energy storage system as well, a grid scale battery for the first time in Sri Lanka.
That's interesting. We don't have much time, but I want to very quickly talk about ADB's emphasis on Sri Lanka developing an export strategy. I'm not sure if I'm wording it right, but you've insisted that that's the way forward, especially when we talk about today's context. But we go back to your initial comment on diversification. For the last maybe 20 years, I've been talking about diversification with our guests as well. But how much, in your understanding, do you think Sri Lanka has understood diversification, its importance, and what's the way out of this current framework to look at a bigger picture for exports especially?
Yes, so I think we all agree that the country needs to take that export-oriented growth path in order for it to grow. And it's maybe counterintuitive, but in this age of deglobalization or fragmentation occurring, this could be the opportunity for Sri Lanka to further open up its economy as well. Take this as an opportunity, and again, a wake-up call to do so. But in order to diversify, it takes some kind of a catalyst to do that. And because sometimes, or in many cases, businesses are risk averse and they're not going to jump into a new business. So back like almost 10 years ago, Ricardo Hausmann did this diagnostic study for Sri Lanka, and he shows this map of all the products that you can think of, products and services. And then it shows that for Sri Lanka, it occupies a little corner here of that huge product space on apparel and then on agricultural products. And he says that it's very difficult to jump to other product spaces like machinery or electronics because these product spaces are very far from those spaces that you want to go into. In order to do that, the most standard way is to attract foreign direct investment. And like I said, these are the non-debt creating financial inflows that also brings in the technology and the know-how to use that technology to make the industry in Sri Lanka more competitive. So again, so the export strategy is now linked to also, you know, how to attract FDIs. At the moment, we are working with the government and focusing on industrial zones because some of the impediments to attracting investment or the businesses to make that investment decision, there are several factors that get in the way, right? I think this...
Factors such as?
Such as, of course, there is the legal and the regulatory environment, the uncertainty around those, how they may change, the unpredictability. Of course, the tariff policies that may not be so straightforward. There are licensing issues, and of course there is access and use of land and the labor law as well. And maybe currently the limited skill set as well, because the country has seen quite a significant out-migration as well. But in any case, by strengthening and expanding these industrial zones, we hope that some of these impediments can be cleared for the offshore businesses to make that investment decision to come to Sri Lanka and then to export their products abroad. So this is what we are trying to work with the government on. And recently...
Is the technical support coming in from ADB?
Yes, yes. So recently we have been approached by the government to provide support to the new national export strategy. I understand there was one before in 2018, but because of the poly crisis, it was not implemented. So the discussion is very nascent still, but we hope that we can engage in that conversation around industrial policies and export strategies to strengthen the economy and so that it can grow. And like you said, by 2028, the country needs to make quite large strides until then.
Export strategy in Sri Lanka, I want to ask you another question, because this is what Sri Lanka is relying on. And as we talk about external shocks again, there is a potential hit to Sri Lanka's exports. How has, maybe if you can share with us in your expertise, countries that have faced maybe not similar but other challenges have used an export strategy stringently to pivot from their original state?
I think in Asia, many countries have adopted that strategy, starting with Japan, Korea, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, of course, China. So they have all adopted that more export-oriented strategy, and there was a clear vision and the consensus of the industries as well to take that path forward, right? So such industrial policies, I mean, I think the word industrial policy used to carry maybe a negative connotation, but that's exactly what had been done. And even if you look at the United States recently, the Inflation Reductions Act or the CHIPS Act, those are industrial policies, right? So I think the idea here is that the government does not pick winners. They don't say, we're going to support this industry or that industry, but, and this is the word of Professor Mariana Mazzucato of the University College London. She says the government needs to be mission-oriented and to identify the problem that it needs to solve. In this case, this is how to expand export and also to attract FDI. And then use its convening power to get all the stakeholders in place and reach a consensus on what are the barriers that needs to be removed. So this, I think, is the way the Sri Lankan government needs to move forward to. But at the same time, this exposure to the global economy has its downside as well. So for example, Vietnam probably is feeling more vulnerable through these reciprocal tariffs, or even the slowdown in the global economy, because the export industry is such a huge share of its GDP. Sri Lanka, on the other hand, fortunately or unfortunately, its exposure to the global market is limited. So apart from any direct impact, that indirect impact may be smaller than other countries that rely so much on the export. But this does not mean that the country should go look inward. Again, the message here is that this is an opportunity to further expand regional trade, regional cooperation, integration, and integrate its enterprises, especially the SMEs, into the global value chain. And there was a World Bank study the other day that indicated that Sri Lanka has the potential to export $10 billion more. And most of that are in markets in Japan, South Korea, China, India, Indonesia. So the country can further look to expand and increase exports to those countries, and also diversify as well in their products. And diversification, again, is very important, because the export products, the basket of goods, is quite low value, right? And if you want to attract talent into the export industry, it needs to pay well. But if the domestic industries are paying better, it's going to be very difficult to make the export industries more active. So we need to be attracting export industries that create more value. Right. And also diversification, because when you look at South Asia, the intra-regional trade is very limited. I think it's only around 5% of the total trade is within South Asia, compared to around 25% in Southeast Asia. Sure. So there is potential to grow that within South Asia as well. But if all the countries are producing similar products, there's not going to be many reasons for each of the countries to
competitive edge
trade.
there.
Yes.
Yeah. I want to also touch upon investments very quickly. Do you think Sri Lanka has sent the message to the rest of the world that the country is ready for investments? Apart from whether the bottlenecks are addressed or technical aspects are addressed in approving, the message of investment, whether Sri Lanka is ready and open to doing business again.
Well, of course, the trust of the international community, of course, it had eroded when the debt suspension was put in place. However, I think the process since then in embracing the IMF program and continuing with the program, as well as quite a swift conclusion of the external debt restructuring, definitely has sent a positive message. And of course, the recent upgrading of the sovereign credit rating also helps to provide a more positive image of Sri Lanka to the investors. However, there are these impediments, these uncertainties in the investment environment, and I think investors know about that as well. And they can choose from, different countries where to invest. And it's especially important now because regardless of the direct impact of the reciprocal tariff, I think what is certain is that there's going to be uncertainty in the global trade environment. So that means that investors globally may defer investment decisions, including Sri Lanka. But because of that, in a way, gloomy environment, Sri Lanka needs to show itself as that shining destination for investment. So there's a lot of work to do. And I think one of the legislation that the government wants to pass is the Investment Protection Act. I don't know the contents of that, but I hope that kind of legislation will also send a positive message to investors, and all the other reforms as well that ensures that there's macroeconomic stability and more transparent rules and regulations.
A destination for investments, a destination as a tourism destination also. You spoke about volume and value over volume when we talk about tourism. You're from Japan,
yes.
if I'm not mistaken. We have many Japanese tourists as well visiting. First, since 2023, have you had a chance to travel Sri Lanka?
Yes, I have. Yes, it's a beautiful country. It is amazing, and I'm telling everyone that they should visit. My parents have visited twice already. It's magnificent, and yeah, I think more people should visit. I think a number of Japanese tourists is quite limited now, which is unfortunate. So I'm trying to spread the word. And to market Sri Lanka. Sure. But again, I think there's a need to diversify because there are so many beautiful offerings throughout the country, and those that are untapped, for example, in the north and the eastern region as well, which we hope we can help to open up and involve the communities as well, so everyone can benefit from the tourism.
Finally, from informal sector, addressing the informal sector in tourism, to sustainability, you mentioned Yala and how our ecotourism, wildlife, there's a big conversation about threatened, the conservation being threatened there. So how do you think the ADB technical support can come here? You mentioned earlier there is some ongoing work, but especially preserving Sri Lanka's natural beauty, Sri Lanka's unique offerings, and again, trying to achieve more value and not so much of volume.
Yes, the key is really the sustainability aspect. If the product that you're offering is being depleted or deteriorated, then it's not going to be a sustainable industry. Maybe you can have a spike of tourists coming in the next 2-3 years, but later the word may spread, and the word spreads very fast these days on social media or these booking platforms. So it is very important, it's critical and vital that proper regulations are in place to ensure that development and tourist operators are adopting such sustainable practices. And again, also to diversify the offerings so that we can reduce over-tourism in selected destinations.
I think that's all the time we have on the show. I wish we had more time to discuss further, but thank you very much, Taka, for your time here at Hyde Park. We're indeed honored to have you discuss Sri Lanka's growth prospects.
Thank you very much for having me.
We were in conversation with Mr. Takafumi Kadono, the country director for Sri Lanka of the Asian Development Bank, that has extended support to Sri Lanka during a crucial period of the crisis here in Sri Lanka, extending financial to technical support. And tonight we were talking about Sri Lanka's economy, the way out, and how these challenges can be mitigated with structural reforms as we move forward. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again next week with yet another conversation. Good night.